Hello, my Taste of Home bakeable friends. I'm so excited to do another video for you today. We're gonna take my confetti cake, and instead of doing a 9x13, we're gonna just take it up one level and we're gonna do a 3-layer 8-inch cake. So really not much changes. The whole recipe stays the same. We're baking it at 325. We're gonna be baking it for a little less time because we've divided the batter into 3 pans. So watch it, but it's gonna be closer to like 25-30 minutes. Remember, when you insert a toothpick in the center of the cake layers, it should come out with a few moist crumbs on it. That's perfect. It still bakes in the pan for like 5 minutes while it's cooling. So keep that in mind. I've already made my layers because you already saw me make those layers in the other video, or you make the batter in the other video. So we're not going to worry about that, but let's take a look at the buttercream because I'm switching it and we're doing chocolate. Just like the buttercream I did for the 9x13 cake, I'm beating my butter first, getting it soft, even though it's kind of slightly cold, but it'll get nice and fluffy. The big thing with this one is we're using chocolate. We're making a chocolate buttercream. This is the type of chocolate that I like to use. Calibo is the brand, and I like to use a good like semi-sweet or dark chocolate. This one is semi-sweet. So I'm actually gonna make a ganache with this. So I've got some cream heating up, and what I'm gonna do is melt my chips with the cream, make this ganache, let it cool a little bit, and then add it to my bowl with my butter. That way we don't get any clumps from adding melted chocolate to our cold butter. Heated my cream, and I'm gonna pour that over my chocolate. So that helps it to melt rather than trying to melt them at the same time in the microwave. Also, like, good quality chocolate makes a big difference here, just in consistency and flavor. So just get like a good quality chocolate, semi-sweet or dark, so we still get a good chocolate flavor even when we add the powdered sugar. And then we're gonna mix this so it starts to melt, and I may stick it back in the microwave now that it's kind of blended for just like 30 seconds to finish off the melting process. So here's the ganache that we are going to be adding to the cake, and I've just been letting, or not to the cake, to the frosting, and I have just been letting it cool so that it doesn't totally melt my butter. But here's the thing, we are adding warm chocolate into our softened butter, so it will soften the texture of our buttercream a little bit. If it feels too soft to like frost your cake with, just refrigerate it for a little bit. But I'm gonna scrape down the sides of the bowl, I'm gonna add my chocolate, and then my powdered sugar, some vanilla, and a little salt, and we're good to go. Added the powdered sugar, the chocolate, and can you see how soft it is? It's kind of just falling off my spatula. That is okay if that's happening to you. Here's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna refrigerate the frosting in the bowl. I'm gonna cover it because our butter has got, your buttercream, if you make it early, just cover it really well. And then bring it back to pretty close to room temperature and give it a good stir in your mixer before you use it again. And then we'll get a really light and fluffy, spreadable consistency. You do refrigerate your buttercream beforehand like I did. I brought it back to room temperature, so it just sat on the counter for a couple hours, and then you just wanna remix it to get it light and fluffy. My cake layers ahead of time. I always wrap each layer after it's gotten to room temperature in plastic wrap, and then I freeze it. And then before I want to decorate my cake, take those out about 30 to 60 minutes before, okay? And then let's talk tools really quick. So a turntable is great when we're doing a layered cake like that. And then I have 2 cake boards that are taped together. So this larger one, I just like to have there because it's something to hold on to, because I'm gonna be taking my cake and putting it in and out of the freezer. And then it's just lightly taped, this one, which is the same size as my cake, it's lightly taped here. And then this is gonna come off. Then we've got an offset icing spatula. Again, this is my brand. We used it in the 9x13. It also comes with a straight. So those come in a set. And then let me grab my scraper to show you that too. I'm going to show you for this cake. We're actually not going to use a scraper, but this is my cake scraper. I love this. We'll use this more on the third option, kind of my ultimate party cake that we're going to be doing in our next video. But this one is 8 inches. The key, and we'll talk about this more later, is how thin and light it is. I'm excited for you to use that. Now, if you do not have any of these tools, you can still make this cake and decorate it on a plate with a knife, okay? And maybe a spoon instead of an offset icing spatula. So I'm going to show you both options. The knife, like a kitchen knife, and the straight spatula, depending on what you have. So let me set up my camera so you get a really good angle of the cake and the frosting, and let's get going. It gives you a really good view of everything I'm doing. I'm gonna just put a little bit of buttercream on my cake board to just hold my cake in place. Now, your cakes should come out pretty level like these ones, but if they don't, just trim off a little bit. We want them to be as flat as possible. So it's good to always get eye level with your cakes to make sure they look nice and even. So I'm going to center it on this cake board. So there's gonna be a little extra space left over. That's totally okay. And now I'm just gonna add about a cup of buttercream right here. You really don't want to do more than a cup of the buttercream, otherwise you'll run out of buttercream by the time we get to the end, and we want to have plenty for the outside of the cake too. So if you want like more buttercream in your filling, you could always just add like a little extra to the recipe, maybe like a half of the recipe. So my offset icing spatula, the goal, if you have one of these, is you want the corner and the edge to always be touching your cake. So it stays flat, you get eye level, okay, looks awesome. Now you can do the next one, and on the next layer, I'm gonna show you with my knife. Okay, so I switched, and I'm just gonna use a knife. In the same way, what's nice about the offset icing spatula is like lifted, the handle, but we can still get a pretty flat surface here because we're using it just like that. And don't worry if your cake layers aren't totally even. I can see some of, like this second one is a little bit bigger. They just sometimes shrink a little bit and some do more than others. Don't worry. We'll put on our crumb coat and then do our final coat. All right, so that looks pretty even just with the knife. And then on your last cake layer, I always like to do top side down because the bottom side on this one is always the flattest and it has a better edge. Okay, now we're gonna do a crumb coat. The crumb coat, and look, I'll just take my knife, is a thin layer of buttercream. Okay, so look, that's gonna be thin. That's all we are going for because it's just to lock in the crumbs, and then we're going to basically just freeze it for like 10 to 15 minutes, and then this coat of frosting gets really set, and we can go right over it with our final coat of frosting. My cake has been frozen for like 10 to 15 minutes in the freezer, right? So I can touch it, my frosting is set. This is locking in all the crumbs, so we have no issues with the cake crumbs coming up into our frosting as we start to decorate this cake. So what I like to do, we're doing a rustic look on the side. So I'm not gonna use my scraper, but I'm using my knife or my spatulas to get this. So I put a little bit on the top first, and I'm just gonna evenly spread it out, and we wanna bring it over the edge just a little bit. Now, another thing to remember too, and just kind of keep in mind, is that our chocolate buttercream is gonna look a little bit light right now, but it darkens as it sits out. Okay, so we've got a little, can you see this edge right here, how it's coming over? Totally okay. Grab your knife or your spatula and start adding some frosting. And what we're gonna do first, before we add the texture of this like rustic look, which is just gonna kind of be like swiping like that, we do wanna get a really even layer of buttercream. So I'm holding my icing spatula really like perpendicular to the cake, well, parallel to the cake. I am like nice and flat against the cake, keep it straight. You can do the same thing with your knife, and you're gonna use your straight side, so not like the rounded side, but the straight side, that edge there, if you're using a knife. So I'm just gonna load up the sides of my cake with buttercream. If you're doing this on a cake board like I am, you're covering this bottom board. We don't want that to show. We're gonna cover that up. So let me get a good even layer of buttercream on here, and I'll speed that up and then show you how to create this really simple but beautiful texture. All right, so now you want to kind of get eye level and just make sure your sides look fairly straight. Just kind of looking from there, yeah? Okay, and then they don't need to be totally smooth because we're adding the texture, but just as you kind of eyeball the sides of your cake, just we want them to look pretty straight up and down like that. Now this raw edge, that got created because we had the buttercream kind of hanging over that edge, and then as we added buttercream to the side, it lifted it. We're gonna keep that. I love that raw edge. So now we're just gonna take a clean spatula, and you can add a little buttercream, but you don't need much, or you can start with it kind of just empty, and we're just lightly gonna create some textures. And we're not trying to pull away a lot of buttercream. We're just kind of creating this texture, and yes, a little bit's gonna come up, and then that's what helps create the texture as we move around. Now, the goal is not to overwork it. Like, I'm gonna stop at one time around, and we've got this really beautiful texture. I feel like this is meant to be easy. It's meant to not take a lot of time. It's a rustic look on this cake. So don't sit there and like work it over a ton of times, because the kind of the quickness and the imperfection of just doing it one time is really when it's at its most beautiful. So that's so simple. You don't have to worry about totally smooth sides. Plus, this buttercream is just, it's to die for, but it's so silky and smooth on its own. I think you will just love it. So now it's good to go, and that's your second cake for the month. Thanks for joining me, you guys.